Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Nate. I also go by Hockey Boy and Nate. In this video, we're going to be discussing about what potential impacts Henri could bring to the Northeast and New England. Seems how it is a tropical storm right now, and it is potentially going to be a hurricane, at least near landfall. So if you guys want more information, please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications because I will be going live on Sunday morning to give you guys all the latest information of what the strength is for Henri, as well as the outer bands and its potential impacts as well. Of course, for the best information, please go to your National Hurricane Center and the Storm Prediction Center, as well as your local weather offices for the best information. If you also haven't already, please be sure to like the video to get this onto YouTube's algorithm to try and get this information out to as many people as possible, because at this point, we just need to spread the word that this stuff is going to be happening within their area. Before we do go into Henri, which is currently moving up the eastern coast, I do want to talk about Hurricane Grace real quickly, as it has made landfall within Mexico. However, it has not made landfall as a Category 1 hurricane as the National Hurricane Center has anticipated. Instead, it has made landfall as a Category 3 hurricane, a major hurricane, which is the first major hurricane within the 2021 hurricane season, as a 125 mile per hour Category 3 hurricane. I want to take a look at the loop here for you all, and I'm going to give you a sneak peek as to what we could potentially see with Henri in the 3D infrared imagery. And if we go back to where it was in the Bay of Campeche, you'll actually see how it progresses and how it's in its stage of rapid intensification before it actually forms an eye prior to landfall. And you'll actually see that here with this imagery as to how the eye shows up. And look at that. That is absolutely, that is unfortunate for the areas here of Veracruz and just this area of Mexico. This is just a very unfortunate situation with excessive amounts of storm surge, probably in upwards of 8 feet to maybe even 12 feet in some spots, probably 8 feet within some areas. And some very strong damaging winds, sustained winds at that, of 125 miles per hour upon landfall. So we're praying for the people of Mexico. But on the other hand, if we look at a lighter note, this 3D imagery, I said it last night when I was talking on Twitter, this 3D imagery is absolutely phenomenal. And props to Radar Omega for actually getting this done, because this is not only going to be very useful for live streams, just to be able to see what type of wind shear and satellite issues that the storm or these storms are going to be dealing with, but it also gives a perspective as to how high these clouds are and gives you a whole new perspective on tropical systems. So props to Radar Omega for actually getting this done. Now let's officially move over to Tropical Storm Henri here. And just by looking at the satellite imagery, you can see that it still hasn't really gathered a whole lot of shower and thunderstorm activity towards the center area of low pressure, but it has indeed become a bit better vertically aligned as it continues to propagate northward. You can see right around here is the outer banks of North Carolina, the border of Virginia, as well as Norfolk and that general vicinity. And you can also see a huge, deep mass of convection right here following along as an outer band. If it can wrap that convection all the way fully around and become a bit more symmetrical, we could be talking about this to be a better hurricane than forecasted on the models. But as of right now, it's moving quite quickly off to the north, so it's not anticipated to really do that, although it is expected to continue to intensify as it propagates further northward. If we take a look at the National Hurricane Center's cone of uncertainty for Henri, which is right here, you can see how it continues to propagate further northward as a expected hurricane, although the latest change here is that by landfall, this thing could possibly weaken back down to a tropical storm. However, on the off chance that it does not do that, hurricane warnings have been issued across portions of Long Island and coastal Connecticut and Rhode Island, as well as tropical storm warnings on each side indicated in the blue. But it's still interesting to see how this will continue to propagate And then even after it does make landfall, the huge concern will be within a 24-hour period to maybe even a 48-hour period. This thing will meander all the way through into New England and be relatively stationary, causing localized flooding risk for most of the area and a potential flash flood situation across this general vicinity. If we take a look at the water vapor imagery of this system, you can see right here is Henri, located within the center part of your screen, but you also have another area to watch, and it's this low pressure system that's now starting to move into this general vicinity of Virginia and North Carolina. And what this is doing is this is creating some very strong shear here, some very strong southerly shear that's going to basically guide Henri to the north. And eventually this low pressure system is going to continue to move on further and further to the east. And what's going to basically happen here is what low pressure systems tend to do is they typically want to rotate around each other once they get very close to their general vicinities. And so because Henri is a low pressure system and there is a upper level low pressure system that's moving on through in the coastal Carolinas and the mid-Atlantic, what will eventually happen is as Henri continues to move further north and as this low pressure system moves further east, this will generally track a bit further to the west and create a bit more of a curl within this general vicinity. And so that's the reason why the track takes it so far west as it does from the National Hurricane Center, because it all depends upon how this low pressure system propagates it towards the New York City, Long Island, and New England general vicinities. The one thing that I can say here, though, is that aircraft reconnaissance have been quite busy with this storm. It has been actually trying to get into the center mass of Henri and seeing what some of the conditions could be within some of the areas. And the aircraft reconnaissance from the Air Force hasn't really gotten a lot of strong winds from the system. You can see that a lot of these winds are actually about 50 knots, which is about 60 miles per hour here at flight level. And that's definitely not hurricane status for the most part. But you can definitely see that they are very active in the system, and they have been active in the system for quite a few days. If we take a look at the NOAA reconnaissance, however, the one thing is different, and that's because you have some very stronger winds on the eastern side of Henri, some of which could even be in upwards of hurricane force at both flight level and the surface. So we could be talking about this thing intensifying within the next few hours into a hurricane and potentially intensify even further to potentially an 80 to maybe even 85 mile per hour category 1. Rapid intensification is not anticipated with this. However, if it does happen, then that forecast cone from the National Hurricane Center will most likely change, and we would be talking about a hurricane landfall instead of a tropical storm landfall within portions of Long Island. If we take a look, as I said, for the cone here, the cone of uncertainty, don't pay attention to the center areas of the cone all too much, because that is just it's just within the cone more or less. Anywhere within this cone is a possible landfall situation within some of these areas, and this does include places of New York City as well. So we really need to watch out for that, especially if you live over there. As a matter of fact, that's where my friend is going to be positioned, our informant for Tropical Storm Henri during our live stream. That's where he's going to particularly be stationed, somewhere around New York City within that general area. The expected landfall is most likely going to be Sunday afternoon, sometime around noon or a little bit later past noon. But that's the reason why I'm going to be live streaming a little bit earlier, is so that we could potentially be able to see the approach of Henri as it gets closer and closer towards the coast. The big thing here is going to be flash flooding for the most part. You can see that the Weather Prediction Center has issued a moderate risk for flash flooding, a 20% risk for flash flooding within some of these areas indicated in red, a 10% indicated in areas around in yellow, and then in green is a 5% chance of flash flooding. So definitely a huge concern here within some of these areas. And a couple main reasons as to why this is going to be the case is because if you take a look at the localized rain, the total rain amount here within the next couple of days, you can see there is quite sporadically a lot of oranges here across places of the Hudson River Valley as well as along Long Island. and this will basically congeal and add on to the amount of storm surge that most likely will be in some of these areas. And unfortunately, the Northeast is not exactly built for these types of storms, as most of them know. And so this is really going to be a serious situation for localized flooding within some of those areas, and we definitely have to monitor that to the best of our abilities. Speaking of storm surge, there's been a recent change in the amounts of storm surge and where. And the big change here is that the Long Island Sound has been increased from 2 to 4 feet of storm surge expected to now 3 to 5 feet of storm surge expected. And I kind of anticipated this. What basically happens with the Long Island Sound is that all of this is a consolidated area, and all the wind and the rain is basically going to be channeled right within here when the tropical system does make its approach. So if you guys imagine a counterclockwise spin here of a tropical system, you can see how the winds actually parallel the sound, and it'll force all that storm surge most likely towards areas near LaGuardia, and it'll just be really concerning for the most part as to how much storm surge will actually build up around that area. Now, if we take a look at the models here, first things first, I'm going to try and designate as to where Henri is, and right here, I think it's pretty obvious as to where Henri is. But then if we take a look here at the upper level winds, we can actually see our other low pressure system right next to it, creating a lot of wind shear here at the upper levels. And what this, as I said, basically said with the satellite imagery, is that this will move Henri and kind of spin it a bit further towards the west due to the fact that they do encounter each other right about here. And so that's the reason why the track of Henri will most likely be as far west as it is, and that's the reason why impacts will most likely be probable within some of these areas. Now, if we take a look at the HWRF model, the simulated radar here as it gets towards its approach towards Long Island, the HWRF actually does agree that there will be an intensifying track here of a hurricane on its approach. And you can see here that there's the coast of New Jersey and Long Island right within here. And the thing about it is notice how it becomes a 975 millibar low pressure system as it is right here. But then once it continues to move further north, it loses 1 millibar, so it gets 1 higher to 976, and then it gets 2 higher to 978. And then once it gets closer and closer to Long Island, it actually gets to 983 and 986. And the main reason because of that is actually because if we take a look over at the sea surface temperatures right now, you can see there is a huge contrast between areas along Delmarva Peninsula in warm waters as well as the cold waters up towards Long Island and Cape Cod. And so right now it's currently experiencing 29 to 30 degrees Celsius waters, which would be about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. But then once it gets up closer and closer, there's a huge temperature drop all the way down to 22 degrees Celsius within some areas. And that is a very, very steep drop, very cool waters for tropical systems. And they don't exactly like that all too much, so they will go into a weakening trend upon its approach. Now, usually what happens with these tropical systems is that for New England, these storms move relatively quickly as it moves off to the north, usually being picked up by a cold front or some other low pressure system that allows it to deepen. But instead, as it gets closer and closer to New England, it actually slows down and it continues to meander throughout that general vicinity. And that's the huge main difference with this tropical system, is that there's basically two different things from typical hurricanes that you guys get. Number one is that obviously it slows down. It doesn't race off through as it typically does. But the other thing too is that it weakens as it gets closer and closer due to the fact that even though in normal circumstances when it moves across, it doesn't really have to deal with those colder waters as quickly as a storm that moves a lot slower. But it also kind of loses structure as well compared to tropical systems that move a lot quicker and kind of just get out, if you know what I mean. So that's the big thing there, is that It's a completely different situation from any other tropical system that you may have had in the past, and there will most likely be impacts within this general vicinity. So, as I said, if you guys want more information on that, I will be live streaming on Sunday morning. We will have some guy in the field live, as well as we'll be having beach cams, we'll be having live radar analysis, potentially because there will be a tornado threat across some of these areas. We will also have live infrared satellite imagery and hurricane hunter analysis as this thing continues to move on through. So if you guys are excited for that, please be sure to subscribe, turn on notifications. Big thing there is that you have to turn on notifications to stay up to date. Share this information with friends and family and on social media, because we need to get the word out as much as possible. And of course, like the video if you haven't already. That's going to be it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you guys tomorrow. Peace out, everyone.